For over 500 years, a question has haunted the halls of British history. Did a king murder his own nephews to steal the crown? This isn't just a grim fairy tale. It's the core of the mystery surrounding the princes in the Tower, a cold case that has defined the reign and reputation of King Richard III. But what if the facts we've known for centuries were lies, propaganda spun by his enemies? What if a modern discovery tied to a quiet corner of Tudor court is finally lifting the fog of suspicion to reveal the unthinkable truth? Get ready to step back into the dark heart of the 15th century, because the true role of Richard III in the disappearance of young King Edward V and his brother, Richard, Duke of York, is being rewritten by a forgotten family connection. The year is 1483. England is exhausted but emerging from the brutal, intermittent civil wars known as the Wars of the Roses. The reigning king, Edward I of the House of York, dies suddenly, leaving behind two young sons, 12-year-old Edward Thimeve, the new king, and his 9-year-old brother, Richard, Duke of York. The boy's uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, a formidable warrior and the late king's trusted brother, is appointed Lord Protector of the child king. The stage was set for a peaceful, if precarious, transition. Yet, within months, the stability dissolved into a nightmarish coup. Richard, the Protector, orchestrated a move to declare his nephews illegitimate, claiming Edward IV's marriage was invalid. Suddenly, the boys were stripped of their royal titles and confined to the Tower of London, not as prisoners, officially, but for their protection before the young king's delayed coronation. The people watched nervously as the boys were last glimpsed playing in the Tower Gardens in the summer of 1483. Then, silence. They simply vanished. On June 26, 1483, the Protector, Richard of Gloucester, ascended the throne as King Richard III. The whisper started almost immediately and has thundered through history ever since. Richard murdered the boys to secure his crown. Richard III was defeated and killed 2 years later at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 by Henry Tudor, who became King Henry VII, thus ending the Wars of the Roses and starting the Tudor dynasty. The new regime had a vested interest in legitimizing its rule, and what better way than to paint the deposed King Richard III as a monstrous tyrant and a child killer. The most famous account of the prince's fate comes from Sir Thomas More, writing decades later in the reign of Henry VIII. More's detailed narrative described how Richard III ordered his servant, Sir James Tyrrell, to commit the vile deed. Tyrrell, More claimed, hired two men, Miles Forrest and John Dighton, who crept into the prince's chamber and smothered them with their bedclothes. Their bodies, More wrote, were secretly buried at the foot of a staircase within the tower. For centuries, historians have dismissed More's account as powerful, politically motivated propaganda. How could More, writing so long after the fact, be sure of these intimate, incriminating details? Where was his source? Was it all a clever fiction designed to blacken Richard's name and justify the Tudor takeover? The long-held doubt of this Tudor narrative is what has made the mystery so enduring, suggesting other culprits could be responsible. Henry VII? Or even a different Yorkist faction? This is where a new, crucial discovery throws the historical argument into sharp focus and suddenly makes the Tudor-era account terrifyingly credible. Historian Professor Tim Thornton researched the life of Sir Thomas More and uncovered a stunning personal connection that could be the smoking gun historians have been waiting for. Thornton's research revealed that Sir Thomas More knew the alleged murderers not as abstract figures, but as people whose families were intimately connected to his own world. Specifically, the sons of Miles Forrest, one of the men More named as a chief murderer, were at court and working alongside Sir Thomas More during the reign of Henry VIII. This is a game changer. More wasn't writing about imaginary hitmen. He was writing about individuals whose sons were his actual contemporaries. This connection strongly suggests that More had inside knowledge, a back channel to the story of the murder from the family of an alleged participant. The detail about Forrest and Dighton, once considered the most suspicious and likely fabricated part of the narrative, now appears to be its strongest anchor to the truth. The discovery also adds weight to the later alleged confession of the mastermind, Sir James Tyrrell, who was executed for treason in 1502. Though many dismissed his confession to the murders as coerced by Henry VII, the fact that the Forrest family's story was circulating within court circles makes it highly likely that the truth, or at least the official Tudor version, was based on verifiable, albeit discreetly shared, information. The mystery of the princes in the tower remains unsolved in the forensic sense, the 17th century discovery of children's bones beneath a tower staircase, assumed to be the princes, has never been definitively proven through modern DNA testing. But the new discovery regarding Thomas More's source shatters the easy dismissal of the standard narrative. It shifts the burden of proof back to the defenders of Richard III. It seems increasingly plausible that Richard III, in a desperate grab for power, did indeed order the killing of his young nephews. The cruel whispers that followed him from the tower's gates to his bloody death at Bosworth were likely not mere Tudor propaganda, but the faint echoes of a terrible truth that lingered, hidden in plain sight, for centuries. The story of the princes is a timeless tragedy of ambition, a powerful reminder that even the most enduring historical mysteries can be cracked not by digging up bones, but by carefully re-examining the people who lived and worked alongside the secrets of the past. If the link between Sir Thomas More and the sons of an alleged murderer was the first shockwave, the second was a discovery rooted in the most mundane of historical documents, a London widow's will. This seemingly innocuous paper, dated decades after the princes vanished, provided a physical, tangible link between the missing boy king and the very man who allegedly killed him. Did we just find the historical equivalent of a smoking gun? The new evidence unearthed by Professor Tim Thornton centered on the will of Margaret Capel, a wealthy London woman who died in 1522. Margaret was the sister-in-law of none other than Sir James Tyrrell, the man who, according to the Tudor narrative, confessed to orchestrating the murder of the princes on Richard III's direct orders. The will listed Margaret's possessions, including an item of extraordinary significance, the chain that was King Edward's. In the 15th century, a personal chain or a collar was not mere jewelry. It was a profound symbol of identity, loyalty, and status. A king's personal chain would be an irreplaceable, highly recognizable possession. Its value was immense, both materially and politically. For King Edward V's chain to be in the hands of the Capel family, the immediate in-laws of the chief confessed killer, Sir James Tyrrell raised a chilling, inescapable question. How did the most personal, identifiable memento of the disappeared boy king end up in the private possession of Tyrrell's family? The innocent explanation. Some argue the chain could have been dispersed legally after Richard III declared the boys illegitimate. Perhaps it was sold or given away as a non-royal item. The sinister implication, the far more unsettling possibility, is that the chain was an insider trophy, a piece of evidence that passed directly from the scene of the crime, the tower, into the hands of a family deeply connected to the man who carried out the act. It's a physical clue supporting the idea that the murder wasn't a historical fable, but a grim, localized reality carried out by the figures named in the Tudor accounts. The discovery places the murder conspiracy directly within the network of families known to Sir Thomas More. More's family lawyer was the Capel's lawyer. More's account named the culprits, and More's world was literally holding the dead king's chain. The geographical and social proximity of the story's source, More, to the alleged conspirators and their possessions is the compelling, terrifying thread that yanks the Tudor narrative out of the realm of mere propaganda. For centuries, Ricardians, the defenders of Richard III's innocence, had a powerful retort to the most damning piece of evidence, the 1502 confession of Sir James Tyrrell. They argued that Tyrrell was executed for an unrelated act of treason against Henry VII, and his confession to the prince's murder was coerced under torture or promised pardon, a convenient tool used by the new Tudor king to finally nail Richard's coffin shut, politically speaking. But the new research gives Tyrrell's confession a devastating new context when Henry VII was told the full details of the murder, including the names of the low-level killers, Forrest and Dighton, and the place of burial beneath the stairs. It's now highly likely he was hearing details that had been circulating through the court by the families of the murderers themselves, who were known to figures like Moore. Further documents suggest that Henry VII's 1502 visit to the Tower of London around the time of Tyrrell's alleged confession was unusually rare. The Tower was not the primary royal residence for the new Tudor dynasty. They preferred palaces like Richmond and Westminster. Henry VII's presence there in 1502, accompanied by his wife, Elizabeth of York, the prince's elder sister, adds powerful weight to the idea that the king was at the Tower for a singular, momentous, and highly sensitive purpose to deal with the resolution of the murder of his wife's brothers. This turns the historical tables completely. It's no longer a question of whether Henry VII invented the confession. It's a question of whether he was finally forced to acknowledge the truth, a truth that had been quietly suppressed but known within the inner circle of the old Yorkist families. No story of Richard III is complete without acknowledging the staunch, well-researched defense offered by the Ricardian movement. These historians and enthusiasts believe the king was a victim of historical slander, and they offer a compelling alternative that these new discoveries must contend with. The princes survived. The Ricardians focus on the lack of contemporary English evidence of the princes' deaths during Richard III's short reign, 1483-1485. They argue that the stories of murder only truly flourished after Henry VII took the throne, suggesting Henry himself might have been the true killer, or perhaps they died of natural causes, or were simply released into hiding. The strongest card played by Richard III's defenders is the phenomenon of Perkin Warbeck. In the 1490s, years into Henry VII's reign, a handsome young man appeared on the European stage, claiming to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the two princes in the Tower. He was immediately accepted by Richard III's sister, Margaret of York, Duchess of Burgundy, a staunch enemy of Henry VII. He was recognized as the true king by powerful monarchs across Europe, including the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. Crucially, new documents found in European archives, part of projects like Philippa Langley's Missing Princes Project, allegedly corroborate key parts of the Warbeck story, suggesting the younger prince was indeed smuggled out of the Tower and raised in secret under the protection of Yorkist loyalists. The Ricardian theory posits that John Howard, Duke of Norfolk, a loyalist of Richard III, arranged the escape of the younger prince. The boys were moved out of the Tower, with the younger prince eventually making his way to Burgundy, and later becoming the man known as Perkin Warbeck. For the Ricardians, the survival of the younger Prince Richard completely exonerates Richard III. After all, if the princes were alive when Warbeck launched his claim, Richard III could not have murdered them in 1483. The existence of Warbeck is seen as irrefutable proof that the murder was nothing more than a cover story, first by Richard III to eliminate them as a threat by disappearing them, and later by Henry VII to justify his execution of Warbeck, the pretender. The mystery now boils down to a dramatic clash between two sets of evidence: the Tudor case, reinforced, the internal evidence, the Capel chain, the Moore family links to the killers, the unusual timing of Henry VII's visit, which proves that the murder story was detailed, local, and based on knowledge from inside the conspirators' families. This makes the traditional narrative of Richard III's guilt terrifyingly plausible. The Ricardian case, the external evidence, Warbeck's European recognition, and the recently discovered documents which supports the idea that at least one of the princes survived and returned to challenge Henry VII. This is the great, enduring tragedy of Richard III. The discovery of his remains in 2012 proved he was a real, complex man, not Shakespeare's caricature. But the new historical research, placing the tools of modern cold case investigation on centuries-old parchment, suggests that the most damning stain on his reputation, the murder of 2 boys in the cold shadow of the tower, may be the one crime he actually did commit. The balance of probability, long stalled in historical limbo, has decisively tipped towards a dark, familiar conclusion. If King Richard III was indeed guilty, his crime only bought him 2 years of peace before his violent death. But for his successor, Henry VII, the shadows of the tower were long. The survival of a legitimate Yorkist heir was the single greatest existential threat to the new Tudor dynasty. So when a handsome, charismatic young man landed on the shores of England claiming to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the 2 missing princes, the claim immediately became the most dangerous conspiracy of the age. This was Perkin Warbeck, the figure who, for decades, has been the Ricardian movement's best defense. Warbeck was no mere street hustler. He was a political weapon, carefully honed and deployed by Henry VII's enemies. The primary force behind him was Margaret of York, Duchess of Burgundy, Richard III's fiercely loyal sister. Margaret, consumed by hatred for Henry Tudor, the man who had killed her brother, trained Warbeck, gave him a court, and vouched for his identity. She provided him with the necessary royal education, contacts, and aristocratic manners. For many, Margaret's recognition of him as her nephew was the ultimate proof. Who would know better than the boy's own aunt? The political stakes soared. 1022. Warbeck was welcomed by King Charles VIII of France. 5. He received full state honors from the Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian of France, who promised him military aid. 96. He was hosted in Scotland by King James IV, who gave him sanctuary, a royal bride, Lady Catherine Gordon, and armed him for an invasion of England. Henry VII was faced with a legitimate European threat. The man claiming to be the Duke of York was not just a vagrant, he was a political meteor streaking across the European firmament, attracting rebels and discontented English nobles wherever he went. Henry VII, the shrewd, pragmatic Welshman who had won his crown on the battlefield, knew that the best way to deal with a shadow was not to fight it, but to illuminate its source. He initiated a vast network of spies, the first truly modern intelligence service in English history, to infiltrate Warbeck's court and uncover the truth of his identity. Henry VII's response was a masterclass in counter-espionage and political warfare. He didn't just meet force with force, he met doubt with resolution. Espionage. Henry's spies successfully infiltrated Warbeck's inner circle, particularly a trusted contact named Sir Robert Clifford. Clifford eventually broke and provided Henry with the vital intelligence. Warbeck's real name was Perkin, born in Tournai, Flanders, and that he was a trained impostor. The treason purge. Armed with this information, Henry launched a brutal purge. The noblest families involved in the conspiracy were executed, including Sir William Stanley, Henry's own step-uncle, whose support had been crucial in winning the Battle of Bosworth. Stanley's execution proved that no one was safe, cementing Henry's ruthless authority. The Tyrrell Confession, revisited. This political crisis provides the perfect backdrop for the 1502 confession of Sir James Tyrrell. As long as a claimant like Warbeck existed, the claim that the princes were alive remained potent. Henry needed to eliminate all doubt. The confession, obtained right around the time Henry was dealing with the lingering threat, served 2 purposes: to finally declare the princes dead and to firmly establish Richard III as the killer, thereby legitimizing the execution of Warbeck as a fraud. After multiple failed landings, Warbeck's final, desperate attempt came in 1497, invading Cornwall. However, the Cornish population, while recently rebellious, refused to support the foreign claimant. Warbeck's army melted away, and he was captured. Instead of immediate execution, Henry VII, ever the pragmatist, treated Warbeck as a curiosity, parading him through the streets of London and forcing him to publicly read a statement confessing his true identity as an impostor. Warbeck was initially kept under house arrest, but his tendency to escape and his continued correspondence with other claimants proved too risky. In 1499, after a final escape attempt, Henry VII had Warbeck executed at Tyburn. The execution of Perkin Warbeck did more than just end a rebellion. It effectively sealed the historical consensus for the next 5 centuries. Henry VII had achieved a perfect victory. He had defeated the rival claimant, proven him a fraud at least to his own satisfaction, and tied the loose end of the prince's mystery directly to his dead predecessor, Richard III. The only remaining physical evidence in the centuries-old cold case appeared in 1674, nearly 200 years after the disappearance, during renovations at the Tower of London. Workmen demolishing a staircase leading to the White Tower's chapel discovered a small wooden chest buried deep beneath the stone. Inside were the fragile skeletons of 2 children, corresponding roughly to the ages of 12 and 9. The finding was immediately, triumphantly declared to be the remains of the princes in the tower. King Charles II had the bones placed in a marble urn and ceremoniously interred in Westminster Abbey. However, the ceremonial burial was conducted without any serious forensic investigation. The flaw, the anatomical analysis performed decades later, was rudimentary. The bones were confirmed to be those of 2 prepubescent children, but their exact age, sex, and relationship were impossible to prove with the 18th century tools available. The irony? To this day, the remains have never been officially disturbed for modern DNA testing. Successive governments and the royal family have denied permission, leaving the one piece of physical evidence permanently ambiguous. So, where does this leave the final verdict on King Richard III? The evidence is overwhelming. The Capel chain, the Moore family links, the Tyrell confession, all point to a Tudor narrative that was based on concrete insider knowledge. The traditional defense that Richard was innocent and the princes survived is challenged by the execution of Perkin Warbeck, a necessary act by Henry VII to prevent further civil war, regardless of Warbeck's true identity. The final truth remains suspended between the weight of modern historical evidence and the tantalizing, unverified existence of 2 small skeletons. For over 5 centuries, King Richard III was a ghost of history, a name synonymous with infamy, his body lost to the violence of the battlefield. The historical debate over the princes in the Tower was always conducted in the sterile vacuum of parchment and prejudice. That vacuum was brutally shattered in 2012 with a discovery so improbable it changed the course of English history. Richard III was found underneath a municipal's parking lot in Leicester, the discovery of the skeleton. Beneath the R-spot of the Leicester City Council car park, the site of the long-lost Greyfriars Church, was a moment of pure historical alchemy. Suddenly, the man at the center of the mystery was corporeal, pulled from the mud and examined by 21st century science. This wasn't just finding a body, it was a forensic court of law, 5 centuries too late. The forensic examination of the skeleton provided astonishing detail, confirming the identity through DNA analysis. Mitochondrial DNA matched that of 2 modern-day descendants of Richard III's sister, Anne of York. Wounds. The skull showed at least 9 wounds, consistent with being attacked by a variety of medieval weapons after losing his helmet during the Battle of Bosworth Field. The most likely fatal blows were delivered by a large blade to the base of the skull, the spinal curvature. The bones confirmed the historical accounts of Richard's physical deformity. He had severe scoliosis, a curving of the spine that would have made one shoulder noticeably higher than the other, though he was not the hunched, malevolent cripple depicted by Tudor playwrights like Shakespeare. He was a physically capable warrior, not a twisted monster. The modern image of Richard III, derived from his bones, is a complex, almost tragic figure, a brave king, physically impaired but lethal in battle, betrayed and slain. His reputation savaged by his enemies, this sympathetic portrayal revived the Ricardian defense of his character, forcing historians to reevaluate the motive for the prince's murder. If the forensic evidence established Richard III was not the caricature of evil, Does that lessen the probability of him being a child killer? Surprisingly, the modern understanding of the man, combined with the new documentary evidence, only makes the case for his guilt feel more tragically convincing. The central question is one of political calculation, not inherent malice. The context of ambition. Richard III was a formidable, highly respected duke and a loyal brother to Edward IV. He only took the throne after being convinced, or convincing himself, that his brother's marriage was invalid, making his nephews illegitimate. This was the era of the Wars of the Roses, where might often made right, and the royal succession was a blood sport. Richard's actions were ruthless, but in the context of the 15th century English nobility, they were not unprecedented. The existential threat. As long as the princes were alive, even as illegitimate sons, they represented the true line of the House of York. They were the perfect rallying point for any enemy, both domestic and foreign. The very existence of Perkin Warbeck years later proved this risk was real. Once Richard took the crown, the princes ceased to be family and became political liabilities. The act of disappearance. If Richard intended to spare their lives, he had only two options: release them into exile or keep them alive as political prisoners. Exile would have created an immediate claimant for Henry Tudor to exploit. Keeping them imprisoned was an impossible security risk that could only be managed by his complete trust. The silent disappearance, a vacuum where historical records should be, was the safest, most final political solution. The new discoveries, the link between Sir Thomas More and the killer's families, and the existence of the King's chain within Sir James Tyrrell's family circle, suggest the details of the murder were known and based in truth. They make the execution of the crime by Richard's loyal subordinates, Tyrrell, Forrest Dighton, chillingly believable. Conversely, the alternative theories that Henry VII was the killer, or that the princes survived, require a vast, coordinated conspiracy that seems less likely than Richard III in a moment of extreme political stress, ordering the removal of his primary threat. The consensus among modern historians, informed by the bones in the documents, has shifted. While Richard III was not a grotesque villain, he was a ruthless political operative. The final verdict, though still unproven in a criminal sense, is now weighted heavily by the evidence. Richard III most likely ordered the execution of the princes in the Tower to secure his stolen throne. The mystery of the princes in the Tower remains the greatest cold case in English history, stretching across half a millennium. Whether King Richard III was truly a monster or merely the victim of brutal Tudor propaganda, the shadow of his desperate choice will forever haunt the Tower of London. The ultimate truth is still suspended between fragile bones and enduring documents, waiting for the day modern science is finally allowed to deliver the definitive verdict. Until that day comes, this incredible historical narrative will continue to captivate our imagination. Our investigation into the mystery of the princes in the Tower ends here. 5 centuries of suppressed truth and conflicting evidence, the bones versus the documents, have left behind a profound question mark in history. But the journey of curiosity never stops. To unlock more complex, astonishing, and factual historical truth, just like this one, make sure you subscribe to the LegendOr channel right now. If you are fascinated by another legendary rivalry rooted in power and betrayal, then head over to our channel and check out Mary, Queen of Scots versus Queen Elizabeth, the epic battle of 2 queens. We created this video on the dramatic collision of power, conspiracy, and female strength in the medieval era just for you. The link to this video is available in the description below. If you found this video compelling, please give us an encouraging like. Let us know your final verdict on King Richard III by leaving your thoughts in the comment section. And to ensure you never miss a historical mystery, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Stay with LegendOr, bring history to life.